Last week, we talked about the best changes made to coasters. New trains, new restraints, new elements, new track, everything that made the ride so much better. Today, let's turn this on its head. Not every change to a coaster is for the better. Sometimes, parks try something new and fail. Other times, they have to take away something everyone loved because of maintenance. There's a whole mess of reasons that parks mess up their coasters. Today, I want to count them down. These are the worst changes made to coasters around the world. First, I want to thank my Instagram followers once again. I reached out to everyone asking for their opinion on this topic. I ended up with over 300 responses, and just like for the good list, I compiled the results to rank the bad list. So in the end, this ranking is based on popular opinion, and doesn't really reflect my own. That being said, I think this is a pretty good list. Number 20, Green Lantern First Flight at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This was the last Intamin Zack spin that opened, the only one of the 4 inside the US, and from the start, they noticed a problem. The train was coming back to the station upside down, the ride ops having to manually flip it back over, and this would cause the ride to have to shut down. Their solution was to add more weight to the train so it wouldn't flip as much. They just filled in its throwing stars, making it less pointy and more rounded off. But the problem is, this coaster was designed to flip. If it doesn't flip, it puts unnatural and uncomfortable forces on your body. That's why Green Lantern had such a terrible reputation, and ultimately, the reason it was shut down in 2017. Number 19, Goliath at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Staying in the park, Goliath opened in 2000 as a hyper twister, the coaster with the world's tallest drop for about 3 months. And aside from that drop, the signature moment was the bone-crushing helix, pulling a sustained 4.5 Gs. This element is not for the faint of heart, and over the years, the park has seen fit to neuter it. They achieved this by cranking up the mid-course brake run, bringing the train to almost a dead stop, easing down to minimize the speed in that helix. Those who ride Goliath to experience that blackout intensity hate this change, and it dampened one of the main reasons this ride exists. Number 18, Maverick at Cedar Point. Maverick is given credit for ending the coaster wars, focusing on speed and forces instead of height. Intamin building this blitz coaster with only a 100-foot drop, but 4,450 feet of track and 3 inversions. That included a twisted horseshoe roll and a heartline roll. This final inversion was built and went through testing, but before the ride opened to the public, the engineers determined the element was too intense and put too much stress on the track and the trains. Maverick's opening was delayed as they replaced the roll with an S-bend. As crazy as Maverick is, it could have been that much better. Number 17, The Boss at Six Flags St. Louis. This massive CCI wooden coaster opened in 2000, starting with a 150-foot drop and over 5,000 feet of track. Its final major element was a 570-degree helix. I never got to ride it in its original form, but apparently this brought great sustained intensity, and most people called it the best part of the ride. Right before the 2018 season, the park thought it was best to tear it out and replace it with a basic turnaround. I couldn't find the exact reason for it, but it seems like maybe the maintenance cost was getting too high. The rest of the ride was still rough, and now they took away the best part. Number 16, Shivering Timbers at Michigan's Adventure. This is another massive CCI wooden coaster. Michigan's Adventure opening this in 1998 before Cedar Fair took over. 122 feet tall, over a mile of track, and featuring a long narrow run of airtime hills. There was one interesting element on the return trip, the trick track. This is a straight piece of track that banks, totally unnecessary and therefore surprising. Before the 2017 season, the park removed it and replaced it with another small hill. Apparently, the trick track was painful. If you didn't know it was coming, it would jolt you to the side. But for a ride already full of airtime hills, they replaced something that gave the ride character. I can't speak to the trick track. I didn't ride this until 2021, but I know some people miss it. Number 15, T3 at Kentucky Kingdom. This Vekoma SLC opened in 1995 as T2, or Terror to the Second Power. After Kentucky Kingdom closed down in 2010, then was saved and reopened in 2014. The new owners decided to reopen the ride but give it new trains, these built by Comeback. Normally, a new train on an SLC is a great thing. In the last episode, we praised Riddler Revenge and Great Nor'easter, but these trains were brutal on the legs. The ride was also insanely rough, but I'm not sure if that was the train's fault. The original trains on these SLCs are bad. They're prone to head smashing, but honestly, those Comeback trains weren't much better. Number 14, Space Mountain at Disneyland. Ever since this opened in 1977, Disney has been tweaking it, trying to keep it fresh and modern, and in 1996, they added on-ride sound. Maybe they didn't pass this idea by all the right people. It turns out, the weight of the on-ride audio equipment was too much for the track to handle. Within a few years, inspectors came in and found the track and supports had been compromised, and if they kept running as is, there would be a structural failure. This caused the ride to be closed for 2 years, Dynamic Attractions coming in and putting in new track, giving it a reprofile and reopening it in 2005. The on-ride audio sounded like a good idea, but it almost killed the ride. Number 13. Star Wars Hyperspace Mountain Rebel Mission at Disneyland Paris. France's Space Mountain opened in 1995, but it wasn't anything like the American versions. This was from Vekoma, a launch looper, and it was called Space Mountain From the Earth to the Moon, themed to Jules Verne's A Voyage to the Moon and a Trip Around It, launching astronauts from Earth using a cannon. And of course, there's a cannon that has a launch lift to start the ride. In 2017, it got new age Vekoma trains, but it also lost the original theme, taking on a Star Wars theme it still has today. From what I've heard, it's far inferior now, and that great original theme is now lost to history. Number 12. Son of Beast at Kings Island. When everyone was just going crazy during the height of the Coaster Wars, building the biggest and fastest rides in the world, Paramount and Kings Island took it a little bit too far. They wanted the world's first hyper-looping wooden coaster, and they got RCCA to do it. There's been so much written and so much said about Son of Beast, how disastrous this ride was. It had structural problems and it got rough really fast. I rode it in its 3rd season, and already it was too rough to enjoy, but I did love the intensity of that vertical loop. In 2006, after the infamous Rose Bowl incident, that being when a beam cracked and caused a jolt that injured a lot of people, they had to shut the ride down and opted to get lighter trains. This would prolong the ride's life, but those trains could not make it through the vertical loop. The ride's defining feature would be removed before the 2007 season. Number 11. Mystery Mine at Dollywood. This indoor-outdoor Gerstlauer Eurofighter has some good theming and a great finale, but that first section has always been weird. When it opened, it had a steep drop into a sharp vertical U-turn, then twist up into the first block break. Before the 2021 season, they made a change. Instead of that drop into the U-turn, it turns left, dives down, and winds up to the block break. This part was never great, but it did have some punch to it before 2021. Now, it's even more pointless than it was before. Number 10. Superman the Ride at Six Flags New England. When this opened as Superman Ride of Steel in 2000, it was immediately one of the best coasters in the world. This Intamin mega coaster has a 221-foot drop and 5,400 feet of track, winning 5 Golden Ticket Awards for World's Best Steel Coaster, coming in second 10 other times. However, the ride today is nowhere near as good as it was when it opened. It used to have the basic wide open T-bar, but after an accident in 2004, it was modified to add bars on the side, plus shin guards to keep people's feet inside the train. Then, when the ride was rebranded as Bizarro in 2009, they added the dreaded U-Bricks, a very large brick-like bar that sits right in your thighs. On all those great airtime hills, you just get your legs pressed into this lap bar. This is one of the most hated restraints, wrecking one of the most celebrated coasters of all time. Number 9. Thunderstriker at Carowinds. In 2010, Cedar Fair announced 2 coasters themed to Dale Earnhardt, his nickname being Intimidator, theming the train to NASCAR. Not only was it a very unique theme, it was also an awesome name for a coaster, Intimidator. After 14 seasons, Cedar Fair no longer had the right to use the Dale Earnhardt brand, so they had to abandon the Intimidator name. At Carowinds, they chose to rename the coaster Thunderstriker. Naturally, this has not been very popular. Some people saying it was a lazy mash of words, others saying it sounded like something AI would come up with. Personally, I'm not as mad as others are about it, but when I saw it, my first reaction was, this seems like something they slapped together at the last second. Number 8. Project 305 at King's Dominion. Here's the other Intimidator that got rethemed, but it's not on this list because of its new name. That's terrible, but I'd like to think that's just a placeholder for a better name later. This is on here because of all the changes made during its first season in 2010. It has a 300-foot drop, followed by a 270-degree upward helix, and that was considered the most intense moment on any coaster ever, crushing you into your seat at 92 miles an hour. It was so intense, people started blacking out, and it was just way too much for the general public. Awesome for coaster enthusiasts, but not exactly a crowd pleaser. As a temporary fix, they added trim brakes in the first drop to slow the train down, and once the park shut down for the 2010 season, they reprofiled the first turn, removing the trims, but widening that first turn to lessen the G-forces. It was a necessary change, and a much better solution than trimming the first drop, but for those who crave intensity, this was a big downgrade. Number 7. Comet at Hershey Park. Comet opened in 1946, the second coaster in Hershey Park's history, and by far the oldest one remaining. It's still very popular, giving a smooth, fun ride and offering up some good airtime. Part of that was the trains. All they had was a buzz bar. There's only one per row. It comes down and doesn't actually touch you, and you find these on a lot of older wooden coasters. They are a coaster enthusiast's dream. There is no chance of being stable. In 2024, Hershey Park unveiled new trains for Comet, and they look fantastic. But there is one problem. They replaced the buzz bar with a typical PTS ratcheting lap bar, one of my personal least favorites. And now, it's a lot harder to get all that great airtime with the lap bar actually on your lap. Don't let the fancy design fool you. This is not a good change. Number 6. Riddler Mindbender at Six Flags Over Georgia. Schwarzkopf built this train looper in 1978. A custom layout with big drops and 2 loops, always at the top of everyone's list of all-time best Schwarzkopfs. This had 7-car trains until 2021, when it got brand new ones from B&M, going along with other changes, including its theme, adding Riddler to the mix, a new control system, and replacing some track. 3 years later, most people seem to agree this update was a downgrade. My biggest problem is the new trains. They feel the same as the old ones, but they have 5 cars instead of 7, so all that good airtime you used to get in the back row is now gone. These new trains not having the same whip. Also, they installed harsh trim brakes, especially before the final inversion. Sometimes it slows the train down to a stop, so basically, you got a ride that runs slower and has less airtime. Number 5. Dododampa at Fuji-Q Highland. In 2001, SNS blew everyone away with this thrust air coaster, launching riders from 0 to 107 in 1.8 seconds. By far the most intense acceleration in the world. It would then go into a wide turn and up and over a top hat, giving some intense airtime. In 2016, Dodonpa was overhauled, reopening in 2017 as Dododampa, increasing the launch up to 111 miles an hour and getting there even faster, 1.56 seconds. That part was awesome, but this change also saw the replacement of the top hat, now featuring a 161-foot tall vertical loop. This is why it's on the list. An outer top hat with a vertical drop is way better than a standard vertical loop, no matter how tall it is. Number 4. Wildcat at Lake Compounds. In 1927, PTC installed Wildcat at Connecticut's Lake Compounds. 85 feet tall, 48 miles an hour, over 2,700 feet of track. A pretty big coaster for its time. It's gone through a lot of changes over the course of almost 100 years, but the reason it's on this list is a 2016 retrack. This was done by Martin and Vlimix, the company you see that works closely with the Gravity Group, and the PTC trains were replaced with GCI's Millennium Flyers. Retracks are almost always popular, but not this one. Apparently, they only redid the lift hill and a couple hills in the middle of the ride, but even those changes didn't hold up. By 2023, the park had to shut the ride down again for a whole year, calling in the Gravity Group to install the pre-cut laminated track, and so far, this has gotten great reviews. Number 3. Goliath at Six Flags New England. This started its life at Six Flags Magic Mountain as Deja Vu, operating in the corner of the park from 2001 to 2011. Then, Six Flags made the decision to move it across the country, reopening as Goliath at Six Flags New England in 2012. This all sounded great until they unveiled the new trains. The originals had staggered seating, 2 on the inside, 2 on the outside. Not the easiest format to navigate, so in an effort to not confuse riders, they got new trains built by Premier Rides. This was a basic 4-across format, just like a B&M inverted coaster. It sounded good in theory, but these trams ran horribly on the track. What used to be a pleasant ride turned into a nightmare, and having ridden Deja Vu a bunch of times and getting on Goliath one time, I can attest, it was miserable. If only they had kept the original trains and may still be around today, but it was scrapped in 2021. Number 2. Coast Rider at Knott's Berry Farm. People were already upset that Knott's tore out Perilous Plunge and replaced it with a Wild Mouse. But hey, a coaster's a coaster. This would be called Coast Rider, the new addition to the boardwalk section in 2013, and it was your typical large park mock Wild Mouse. It was fine until 2017 when the trains were retrofit with shin guards, this following a 2014 accident where a boy hurt himself trying to exit a moving car, and the 2016 lawsuit that followed. Now, not only do you have a cookie-cutter, heavily trimmed Wild Mouse, if you're a normal-sized adult, your shins get dug into the whole ride. Only kids have a shot at having an enjoyable ride. After this change, Coast Rider basically has nothing going for it. Number 1. Lightning Rod at Dollywood. This got by far the most votes, more than triple what Coast Rider and Goliath got, and maybe you can chalk it up to recency bias. Of course, I'm talking about the new chain lift replacing the launch, but you can take it back even further. When this opened in 2016, that LSM launch lift would fling you over the top, and ever since then, they just kept dialing it back, finally taking out the launch in 2024 because there was just too much downtime. I haven't ridden the new Lightning Rod yet. I'll get back on it this summer, and the argument is, the launch was making the train crawl over the lift hill anyway, and the chain will do the same thing, therefore not affecting the rest of the ride. And now, the ride will be open a lot more often. That may be true, but I have to say, no matter how slow that launch got over the last 7 years, it was still cool to see the train shoot up that lift hill. Now, it's just kinda sad, and a reminder of what used to be. The world's first launched wooden coaster, turned launched steel coaster, turned lift chain steel coaster. Lightning Rod will never be as good as it was in 2016, and that isn't just because of the new chain lift. That's all I got for now. Thanks again to everyone who voted. I think you put together a really great list, and that doesn't even include removing the 0G rolls from the chiller at Great Adventure, or the double down from Colossus at Magic Mountain. There are so many changes out there, and as you can see, a lot of them are for the worse. But if you want to see the best changes, click the card above or in my end screen. Let me know if you have any thoughts and what else you would have added. And if you enjoyed the video, please drop a like, and give me a sub if you're new here and want to see more like this. Also, check out my second channel where I post copyright-free off-ride footage, and my baseball channel if you also happen to love baseball. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.